Okay, today we're going to be writing linear equations. So the first thing we're going to start with is remembering our our slope-intercept form for linear equations, which is y equals mx plus b. And just reminding you that the m represents the slope, which is the rise over the run, the constant change. And the b stands for your y-intercept on the graph, and it's always where the x is 0 and the y is a number. So from that, there's a lot of ways that they can ask you to write linear equations or functions, so we're going to look at a bunch of different examples. So the first way that they can ask you is they can say, okay, here is an equation, y equals 3x plus 4. And they can tell you, find the slope and the y-intercept. Another way they can ask you is they can say, okay, the equation is y equals negative 4 over 5x minus 8. And they can say, find the m and the b. So regardless of whatever letters or names they give you, you have to recognize that m and slope are the same and b and y-intercept are the same. So the slope of this one, it's in y equals mx plus b. So the slope is wherever the m is. So it's in front of the x. So the slope here would be 3. And the y-intercept, sometimes you'll see it written differently. It doesn't matter. Y-intercept is technically a point. So in this case, the 4, right, is your y-intercept, is your b. So I would write it's at the point 0, positive 4. Okay, so that's one way. Or they can say, hey, just tell me what the m and the b are. Well, in this case, y equals mx plus b. So here's my m. So my m is negative 4 over 5. And my b, well, my b is just right here. Now, it's not 8. You have to be careful. It is negative 8. So I would put negative 8. So sometimes you can just put the number negative 8. Whereas in number 1, they asked for the y-intercept. So I listed it as a 0.04 instead of just saying 4. So that's kind of some differences that you guys will see, especially when you're doing your quizzes. The second way, which is very similar that they can have you write, is instead of giving you the equation and asking you for the slope and the y-intercept, what they'll actually do is they'll say, hey, here's an equation with a slope of negative 3 and a y-intercept of 0, negative 5. And they'll ask you to write it. Well, the two pieces of information you need are the slope and the y-intercept, which they give you. So if I want to write an equation in y equals mx plus b, well, y equals my m is my slope, so that's negative 3, x plus b. Well, my b here, it's not 0. Remember, it's always the y value of that number. So it's just the negative 5. So instead of putting plus negative 5, I can just put minus 5. Now, very closely related to 2, they can also, instead of writing slope and y-intercept, they can say, okay, y equals 1/2 x plus 3. And they can say, find the slope, find the y-intercept, etc. And I would say, okay, my slope y equals mx plus b, so it's 1/2. And my y-intercept is my b. Well, where's my b? Y equals mx plus b, so it's 0, 3. Remember, not just 3, 0, 3, because they asked for the y-intercept. Okay, those are the basic ways that they can ask to write. Now, what they can also do is they can say, okay, here's a graph. Tell me the equation. Now, for some of you, this goes back to practicing graphing, which you did the lesson before. So some of you are very, very good at this, so this part should be pretty easy. So they give you a line on the graph already, and you know that your goal is to ultimately get it to look like y equals mx plus b. That means you need to find the slope and you need to find the y-intercept. Well, the easiest one to find is the y-intercept. So if I'm tracing along my y-axis, I'm trying to see where my red line is crossing my y-axis. It's intercepting my y-axis here. So right here at that number, which is 3. So I know my b is a positive 3. I can put my x here, but I still don't know my m. So that's the second piece that I need to find. So what I need to do is find another point on the line. Here is not a point on the line because it's not on the corner of one of the boxes. I need it to be directly on the corner. So if I kind of just go down and maybe I miss some, right here is directly on the corner of the grid, the light grid in gray. Now that I have 2 points, 1, 2, I can find the rise and the run. So if I rise, if I start here, I go up 1 box, 2 box, 3 box, 4 box. So that's up 4. Then to get back to the red line, I'm not just going over to anywhere. I go over 1, 2, and I went to the right. So if I have a slope that's up, that's positive 4. Remember, it's the change in y over your change in x. So that's positive 4 over 2. Now I can go ahead and if I want to, okay, I can leave it as 4 over 2x plus 3. But that might not be an answer choice because 4 divided by 2 is an even 2. So I also might see 2x plus 3. And both of those are equivalent. So if you're typing it in, either one of these are okay. Now this was for a line that had a positive slope. So we had a positive slope here. There's going to be other graphs that have a negative slope. We're going to do the same thing. So we know we want to get it to look like y equals mx plus b. So we go onto our graph and we trace the y-axis until we cross with the red graph, which is here. That's at -5, so I can put a -5 in for my b. I still don't know my m, and I can fill in the x. So I have a blank here. I need to fill it in. So I need to find another point directly on the corner. Not there, not there, not there, not there. Oh, right here. And I put a point. Okay, now I do my rise and my run. So I go up 1, 2, 3. And then I go left to get back to the line. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I do my change in y over my change in x, well, up is positive and left is negative. So -3 over 4. Now this one doesn't change to anything else because 3 divided by 4 is not a whole number. Now the only tricky thing about this is they can give you lines that look like this. Now we did do this in the last lesson, but I'm just going to remind you. So again, I'm looking to get y equals mx plus b. So I do the same thing. Trace until I cross that red line, which is here at 5. So my b is 5. Now I find another point along this line. Well, if I look, well, all of these are points, so I'm just going to pick this one. So if I do the same thing, do I have to rise at all to get even with that point? No. So that's 0. And if I think about my x, well, I go over 1, 2. So I could put 0 over 2 in my answer, but that's probably not going to be an answer choice because what's 0 divided by anything? It's just 0. So 0x plus 5. But if I have no x's, do I have to write it? No. So it could also just be y equals 5. Most likely you will see the bottom one as an answer choice. But again, if you're typing it in, any of these are acceptable because they are all equivalent. So right now, you're about halfway through. So keep going. You're doing a great job. Thank you for making sure that you're taking the notes. They're going to help you. The last two ways that they can have you do this is from tables and from points. And now these are the exact same method. So I'm only going to do 2 tables and 1 point, and that's it. Okay, so you guys are doing great. Okay, so from a table, well, right now you want to put it in y equals mx plus b. And you might not remember how to find the b. And that's necessarily not really everyone's intuitive approach when they're doing this. So if you think back to what we did last semester is we had another form. And one of them was called standard, and that was okay. But there was another one. And the other one was called, you should be saying it, point slope. And with point slope form, we were able to find a slope and then use a point. And that's what we're going to do. So if I'm looking at my table, this is where some of you struggled. So hopefully you're rewatching it. I want to figure out how to get from 3 to 11. Well, if I want to get from 3 to 11, I need to add, because it's going up, and I'm adding 8. And if I want to get from 0 to 2, well, I'm also going up, so I'm adding, and in this case, I'm adding 2. So when I write my slope, the change in y over the change in x, it's 8 positive and 2 positive. Now I can leave it like that, or if I just do 8 divided by 2 in the calculator, I get 4. Now this would be great if I knew my y-intercept, but I don't know where it is in this table. They don't just say y-intercept like they did before, and I can't look at the graph and trace it. If we had your calculators at home, you could probably do that, but you guys don't have the fancy calculators. So we're going to have to use point slope. So let's remind you of what point slope form is. Y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. And right now we found that the m was 4. Okay? Now, this is where you get to pick any point in your table. And remember we said you kind of want to think about this. Well, I'm going to pick just the first point because those are the smallest numbers. So y minus, well, what's my y value in the point that I circled? 3 equals 4 is my m times x minus, well, what's my x value in the one that I circled? 0. So all I did was circle one of the points. I plugged in 0 for the x one, because that's the point I picked. And I plugged in 3 for the y one, because that's the point I picked. And I got the 4 from when I found the slope. So now I just got to clean this up. So if I have a number outside of parentheses, I have to distribute. So I get y minus 3 equals 4x minus 4 times 0 is just 0. Now it almost looks like y equals mx plus b, right? But the y is not by itself. The y has this minus 3 next to it. So I need to get rid of it. How would I get rid of it? I do the opposite. So the opposite of subtraction is addition. If I add it here, I have to add it over here to the 0 because they're the like terms. So I get y equals 4x plus 3. Perfect. So you should kind of be remembering this. Again, the reason why we had to use point slope is because they didn't tell us the y-intercept like before, and there wasn't a graph. Okay, one more table. So make sure you're pausing to copy down the table so that way you can work through this with me. You should be pausing along the way. So we're going to do the same thing that we did, and we're going to try to find the change in the table. So if I'm thinking, okay, there's some negatives over here, and I don't really feel comfortable with negatives. So I'm going to just jump to here in my table because these are positives, and you can do that. How do I get from 5 to 3? Well, it's going smaller, so I subtract, and I take away 2. Well, how do I get from 1 to 3? Well, now I'm adding, because it's getting bigger, 1 to 3, and I'm adding 2. So when I think about my slope and my change, well, the change in the y's over here was negative 2. The change in the x's over here was positive 2. And I could leave it or just type in my calculator and I get negative 1. Now, I don't really care which point you use, but I don't want to use some stuff with negative. So I'm just going to circle this one because it's the first one that's both positive, 1 and 5. Okay, so point slope. So here we go. So y minus y1 equals m times x minus x1. All right, let's plug in. So y minus, what y value did we choose? Well, the y value we chose was 5. That's what I circled. Equals, well, what m did we find? We found an m of -1. So a -1 goes here. Then x minus, what's the x value we chose? 1. That's the point we circled. And now we're just going to distribute. So distribute. So leave y minus 5 equals -1 times x, -1x. -1 times -1, +1. And then we're going to add 5. And we're going to get y equals -1x plus 6. And there's my equation in y equals mx plus b. Oh, sorry. Let me move it up a little bit for you. Okay, we're going to do one more, and that's going to be about it. Okay, we are going to do between 2 points. So the next one and the last one is between 2 points. Now you're going to have to do this a couple times on your work. So the points that we're going to use are 3, -5, and 0, 4. Oops, sorry, I didn't realize you couldn't see that. 3, -5, and 0, 4. Now, many people think that this is different, but it's actually just like a table. And that's kind of what we're going to do to make it a little bit easier for ourselves. Remember, this is an x and a y, right? X and a y, and this is an x and a y. So I can just put them in a nice table for myself and make it a little easier. 3, -5, 0, 4. And I can do the same thing I did before. All right, how do I get from -5 to 4? Now this is a little harder. It was negative and it's going to 4, so I'm adding. And I can think, well, I add 5 to get to 0 and then 4 more to get to 4. So I add 9 in total. How do I get from 3 to 0? Well, I'm taking away something because I'm getting smaller, and I'm taking away 3. So my m, my change in y over my change in x, my slope, is +9 over -3. Again, I can leave it like that, or just type it in your calculator, even on your phone, and it's going to give you -3. Now, if I want to use point slope, I need a slope, which I just found is -3, and I need to circle one of those points. I probably wouldn't circle the first one because there's a negative there. Let's circle the second one. So now if I plug in y minus, well, y1, the y I chose and circled was 4, equals the m, well, the m we got was -3, so here's -3, times x minus, the x1 I circled was 0. Okay, so now I'm going to just distribute and solve. So distribute here, leave this guy alone for now. -3 times x, -3x. -3 times 0 is 0. Almost. Y equals mx plus b. Close, but I have a -4 by the y. I need to get to the other side, so I need to add 4 to both sides. So I get y equals -3x, and 0 plus 4 is 4. So there's my equation. There are all the ways, mostly, that you'll be writing equations. Good luck.